And I just felt like God brought me, as much as a flawed person can feel like God brought me, to a verse that all of us know. All of it, 2 verses all of us have memorized. We probably have them on a keychain or on a shirt or on a plaque on the wall or something like that. And that is Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 and 6. The title is Trust. Who are you trusting? Share a story with you that I've shared before, and you've heard this story or one similar to this probably many times. But it was a story of a missionary who felt like he needed to go get alone, kind of have a little sabbatical to get alone with the Lord, and went to the woods in Canada to be alone, to pray and study. And he said one morning he got up and walking through the woods praying, and he walked up on a bear. And he did as you and I would do, he cried out to God. Because he knew that if God does not deal with this bear, he's dead. Or at the very least, he's going to have a really bad day. So he cried out to God. He was desperate for God. And the story goes that bear looked at the missionary, turned and looked a different direction and just walked off. And he praised God, and he was just overwhelmed. And then he went on about what he was doing and went back to where he was staying and went on with his day. And then later that night, he lays down to go to sleep. And then a fly shows up. And as he lays there with whatever else was going on in his mind, he's wrestling with, trying to go to sleep, this fly keeps buzzing around, landing on him, irritating, aggravating him. And he keeps swatting at this fly, dealing with this fly. And time goes on, and he's dealing with this fly. And when he saw the sun coming through early in the morning, he realized something. He realized that earlier that day that he saw a bear and he cried out desperately for God. And then that night when he lays down to rest, a little fly comes in. And he said to himself, I can handle this, because he did cry out to God. And he's been dealing with that fly all night and hadn't got a 1 minute of sleep. And it ain't like that with us, where with the things that we're so scared of, like cancer or these big things, we're all on our knees, on our face for God, trusting Him, seeking Him out. But when it's the flies in our lives, means there's avenues or alleys that we think we can go down. We have a lot harder time to trust the Lord. Amen? That guy thought he can handle this as a little fly. And he couldn't handle it. And the consequence of that was he was restless. He was tired. He would have to try to figure out how to catch up on his sleep. But when he was desperate for God, he saw the sovereign hand of God step right in and handle a situation. And how many times do we get ourselves in bondage in our day-to-day lives and our decisions that we make because we say, well, I can handle this, and God gave me a brain. That might have been one of the arguments he used to himself with that. God gave me a brain, I can handle this. God gave us a brain, amen? Does anybody profess they created their own brain? But let me just share something with you, again, as a reminder. He never gave you a tool, including that precious brain, that you will not seek His will out, not be desperate and dependent upon Him. To say it another way, He did not give you a brain so you can be a practicing atheist. Because an atheist would make a decision based on what feels right or what makes sense to them. And doesn't God speak very clearly to us through Isaiah, where He says in chapter 55, my ways are what? Higher than your... My thoughts are what? Higher than their thoughts. So what does that tell me at Albany, Georgia? That tells me that when I foolishly think that this time I'm smarter than God, I don't need God, and I have a brain, and I can make this decision on myself, and I can depend on my resources and my skill set, you know what God said? You have missed out the boat. Amen? Because Isaiah tells me very clearly, my thoughts tab, the skill set, first thought tab that you have, I gave to you. And my thoughts and my ways are higher than yours. or anyone else you run to go get counseled from. Amen? So that everything should be a bear to us. And nothing should be a fly to us. Amen? And we need to watch out for those flies because they're stumbling blocks for us. Because we're so prideful and we're so foolish to think, I got this. When you and I have nothing. At best, but a sovereign God has allowed man to have limited control of his life. The very first commandment of the 10 Commandments is in Exodus chapter 20 and verse 3. And it plainly says, thou shalt have no other gods before who? Or me. What about me, God? Can I have me before you? No. You know, I met a man here in Putney. He said, you know, I don't believe in the God of the Bible because I read that he said he's a jealous God and I'm supposed to love him even more than my own family. And I can't believe in that God. Man, I wouldn't want to believe in a God that wanted me to love anything but him. I mean, above him. Amen? That includes my family. Well, what if there are special needs? That includes special needs children. You know, we come up with all these exceptions. At all times, in all seasons, I am called to love, to trust, and to be completely dependent upon him for all things in life. Amen? So let's read these 2 verses and then let's kind of break them down and talk about them. Trust in the Lord with what? With all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him. And he will make your path straight. It says, first it says, trust in the Lord. We are not encouraged, but we are commanded here to trust God rather than our own wisdom. The word trust here is the same word used and described here in Psalms chapter 22 and verse 9, describing a baby. The psalmist says this, Psalms chapter 22 and verse 9 says, yet thou art he who brought me forth from the womb. Thou didst make me trust when upon my mother's breast. What in the world is the psalmist saying there? He's saying, God, you are he who have guided my life to trust you to a point as a baby finds rest and trust on a mother's breast. Now, mamas, grandmamas, how many times have you picked up a screaming child? And they're screaming about stomach ache or whatever, the scared or whatever the problem was, and you pick them up, and within moments, they quit kicking and screaming, don't they? Usually. And sometimes they find such rest, what happens? They fall asleep. Isn't that amazing? You go from screaming and kicking either because you don't feel good or you're scared or whatever the reason was, and within 30 seconds or so, all that usually stops, and sometimes they even find such rest to a point they go to sleep. And the psalmist is saying, Lord, as I found rest in my mother's breast, I find rest in you. Trust in the Lord. Now I want you to think about the bears in your life and the flies in your life, and do you trust him where you find rest in him the way a child does on a mother's breast? Where you're such in peace that you can just doze off and go to sleep. Now I can't do that if I give something over to God and then I take it back. Can we? And you know when we really do that? Now listen, and I've said that I think last week or whatever it was, if the doctor said Tab, Noah, or Titus, they have cancer, I ain't giving that to God and taking it back, because I think it would be really easier to do that, or easier to do that than if he says, Tab, or the school system says, Tab, it's this, and I think, oh, that just really irritates me. And then I start thinking, well, I know her boss. I know people on the board. They have no idea what they have just done. And then I think, no, I'm going to give it to Jesus. And then I'm driving later and I get irritated all over again. I know y'all don't experience that. What I just did. Am I trusting? Am I resting? No, I'm irritated. I just took it back. It is harder to allow God to say, God, there are some avenues that I could do, make the situation better. Who knows what I could do with the situation? But I am going to let it sit in your hands. And every time I get irritated about it, I'm going to say, God, it's yours. God, it's yours. Because you clearly tell me that your thoughts are higher than my thoughts. And you also clearly tell me in Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 11, you start out and say, I have a plan for you, declared the Lord. Well, that includes school systems, and that includes doctor visits, and that includes everything. Amen? So are we trusting God, and are we trusting God in our life the way the psalmist describes? By the way, just a thought of application. Don't let fear make your decisions. Don't let fear. You know, the Bible said perfect love cast out all what? Fear. Don't let fear make your decisions for you. Let God make decisions for you. And I love the picture in Matthew chapter 26 and verse 39, which is, of course, this is Christ going to pray in the garden, knowing what's right around the corner. And remember, when Christ was here on earth, He was 100% man, just like you and I. But He was also, and always has been and will be, 100% God, but He was also 100% man. So He had the same struggles physically. He had the same temptations we do. He had the same physical struggles. And He knew what laid right around the corner for Him. And this is what He said. It went a little, talking about Jesus, went a little beyond them and fell on His face. By the way, that's always a good place to find yourself in times of trouble, is on your face. And pray, saying, My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not my will, Thy will be done. You know, Jesus saw past, through faith, He saw past what was going to be right around the corner for Him. And He saw the glory that His Father would receive by His child being obedient to the will of His Father. You know, you read through Hebrews chapter 11, it gives you a list of people who they, lack of a better term, praise because of their faith. And in Hebrews it talks about one of them is Moses. And it says there, basically by paraphrase, that Moses, of course, grew up in Pharaoh's house, and Pharaoh's daughter had adopted Moses. And it says, by faith, Moses passed up the blessings of the world. I mean, he walked away from the title of being Pharaoh's daughter's child, because he saw greater rewards, greater riches. Now, what does that mean? That means by faith, Moses said, even though I have a lot here in Pharaoh's house, by faith, I want to honor my God. And so I'm going to take a stand with God, and I'm going to remove myself from here. And I'm going to put myself where God wants me. Amen? By faith, Moses took a stand. By the way, without faith, you're not taking a stand for God. And I'm going to probably say something like this tomorrow about Miss Imogene. And let me tell you, as a minister, it's always nice, in case I preach one of your funerals, it's always nice not have to scramble and worry about am I telling the truth if I say something. I'm just telling you, it's always nice to be able to have peace about that. I did do a funeral one time, and somebody come up to me and said, "Do you really believe what you just said?" And I thought to myself, I did to that question you asked me. And I'm going to say, you know, one thing that always fascinated me about Miss Imogene was I have gone to the hospital many times to see senior adults. I've gone to the nursing homes many times. And I've just, including my grandmothers, and I have just come to the conclusion or just accepted as a fact and reality that when we get older and we lose more of our independence, we become either angry, we become more afraid, We become bitter, and it's noticeable. But from day one of going to visit Miss Imogene in the emergency room in the hospital, and she never came back to this church. And then we've many visits in the hospital, many visits in the nursing home, and so on. She has always embraced her circumstance. How could she do that? She's flawed. I'm flawed. Jesus had to die just as much. Jesus' blood had to be shed for her to be saved as it was for me or anyone else. Because by faith, she chose, kind of like Moses, to look beyond her circumstance and look to a greater glory, a reward waiting for her. And because she was willing by faith, trusting the character of God, the promise of the Word of God, it was easier for her, because she had the right perspective, to look beyond losing of independence and what a stroke does to a body, and still be a witness to her, those who came and saw it. I'll tell you one of the neatest things I just blew me away is Miss Imogene, bless her heart, she's been ready to go for many months. And it's been my prayer that God take her every day. But I guess a few weeks ago, she felt this was really the time, and she wanted every family member there. As she shared her story of salvation, which they probably heard before, but she shared it again. And she wanted to know if they felt confident that they're saved. That's pretty neat. That's pretty neat. And then she might have told all of them something, I don't know, but I know she told a few of them, there's some things you need to get right. By faith, trusting the Lord, she looked past her circumstance, and she was found faithful to holding on to the glory of God that He gave her. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. With all my heart means there's no plan B. I trust God with everything, or I don't trust God at all. There's no fallback plan. Listen, when Jesus went to the garden here right before He goes to the cross, and He said, Lord, if it's possible, take this cup from me, but not my will, thy will be done. When he submitted and said, thy will be done, there was no fallback plan on that. That was 100% surrender. Thy will be done. It's kind of like, if I was going to try to give an illustration to it, it's kind of like if you watch these detective shows or detective movies, and say, you probably have seen this before, like a detective is working a case, and then maybe an FBI agency comes in and they said, listen, we're taking over now, and I want whatever you found, all the interviews you've done and all the information, I want all that, and at this point you're done with it. And if you want to keep your job, you have to hand over everything you got to the FBI agent, and then you have to walk away. It's like that with God. If I can trust in His character, that I hand it all over to God and say, I am done with it. Until or if God tells me to do something. And then it's still trusted in God's character, because now God's telling me to do something. And then I got to revisit, am I going to trust God to do now what He's told me to do? But at this point, I have handed it all over to God. It's kind of like you have to do with your children. I mean, there comes a point, or actually it comes when they come into this world, when you have to realize, God, they're yours. I can't keep them breathing. There's little I can do for them. And listen, if you have you should come to our house sometimes. By the grace of the Lord Jesus, Noah is still with us. And that is on a daily basis. Because you just need to come to the house. And we do as Noah-proof as best as we can Noah-proof. And He shows us many different ways how we need to Noah-proof better. And listen, I'm just saying, there's more things been in that mouth than who knows and who wants to know. and He is still with us. You just give it to God. Amen? With all your heart. Verse 5 says, lean not on your own understanding. When we rely completely on God, we will lean not on our intellect, not on our strength, not on what we sense to be right or wrong. And you know what else we won't do that we're bad about? We'll quit trying to help God accomplish His will. I'll give you a story from a story you know, you've heard all your life. Genesis chapter 16, where God made a promise that He was going to have to perform a miracle for this to happen. God promised Sarah and Abraham what? A child. And then time went on, and I know we can't relate to this, and they got impatient, didn't they? So Sarah, being the woman, said, God needs my help. And Sarah came up with a plan, didn't she? And she brought her maidservant, and she said, obviously, this is how God wants to accomplish this. And she brought, and Abraham and the maidservant got together, and they had a child, didn't they? What was that child's name? Ishmael. Are we ever affected by Ishmael's descendants? Ever know anything about this? Oh, that's right. That was the birth of the nation of Islam. Oh, okay. Okay. If there's never been a better reminder that we mess things up when we help God. By the way, did God forget that promise? Did God make a promise and thought, I don't know how in the world I'm going to do this? Did He not, or did He honor that promise? He honored it. We need to do some self-evaluation to make sure we're not trying to help God. Because you know what? One of us, if Sarah would have done that, somebody else would have done the same thing. But we really get people in trouble, don't we? By the way, that's a neat thing about sin. It affects you and it affects others, doesn't it? And sin takes us further than we want to go, and it costs us more than we ever thought it would cost us. Lean not on your own understanding. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. And lastly, verse 6 says, and acknowledge Him. When we acknowledge Him, we will get to know Him in a greater way. You know, there's a lot of thoughts of application you can go down on this. The one I want to share is this one, what I've shared before. I can't even understand the heart of Paul when he says in Philippians 3:10 that I may know you in the power of the resurrection and have fellowship. Think about the word fellowship, what that means. He said, and have fellowship in what? In your suffering. Well, when's the last time you heard that at a prayer meeting? You know that's interesting. You know what I said? We need to pray. We need to pray. We need to pray. Well, let's take Philippians 3:10, and let's pray that over our lives, our children's life, and our grandchildren's life. You'll find out who right now is trusting the Lord Jesus with all their heart, and all their ways they're acknowledging Him, leaning not on their own understanding. We spend a lot of time taking that daily cross God gives us and try to cut some of it off, don't we? We spend a lot of our prayer time saying, God, really, I don't know what you're thinking. You don't realize how heavy this is. Or you don't realize how long I've been carrying this. Can you give me just a nugget, just a boost of encouragement somehow that this will be over soon or something good's going to come? Can you give me something, God? God, can somebody come by and help me a little bit? And you know, and by the grace of God, He usually does give us a little boost of understanding why you're carrying it. And or somebody comes by and comes along and kind of like a coach to you and encourages you along. But we're so focused on that cross and how heavy it is. We miss, and maybe we get to a point we don't even really care. It's through that cross that I have a greater witness of Him. And it's through that cross that I get to know Him and acknowledge Him in a greater way. Amen? Manly Beasley said this, and I've chewed on this for the last few weeks. He said, some folks go to church and know a little bit about the Bible, and they add biblical principles to their life so they bless them. He said, then some folks will go a little deeper, and they say, as they pray, God might say, well, go witness this person or go do something. And so they obey God. And they'll pray, well, God, should I go on the mission trip this year? And they feel like God said yes, and so they obey God and they go, or whatever the case may be. And they say, and, they want to be obedient to God, and they have testimony. Now, well, God led me to do this, and I did this, and I went on this mission trip, and this is what I saw God use. And they have these testimony stuff. He said, but then there's some folks sometimes that they just say, I want to know Jesus as a person. I don't want to just hear Him sometimes and do things for that He tells me to do. I don't want to just know some biblical principles to apply to my life, to help me to not get in bondage all the time or whatever the case may be. But I want to know this God who was willing to send His Son to die for me. Because when it boils down to it, I'm real selfish and everybody I know is real selfish. And the only time we don't think we're selfish is because we're comparing ourselves to people more selfish. But I want to know this God who is so loving, so unselfish that He would send His Son for me. I want to know Him. I want to be able to trust in Him. By the way, the better I know Him, the better I trust Him. Amen? I think we might, it's kind of like the tail wagging the dog. I think we try to go, I got to get this more faith, I got to get more trust. Oh, I want that kind. You ever heard that? Somebody gives, oh, I want that kind of faith. Listen, it ain't the faith, it's going deeper with Jesus. The faith will take care of itself. Does that make sense? I mean, many times I pray for that faith. God, give me the boldness, and God will do those kind of things. But listen, get more of Jesus or surrender more yourself to Jesus, and everything else will take care of itself. Listen, speaking of witness, the witness you want is what the witness that Jesus portrayed through Peter and John when it said they knew they were uneducated men, but they had been with Jesus, the Bible says. And what we want to do is, we want people to think that we're sharp, or we are afraid to witness because, well, what if they ask me a question I don't know, and all this stuff, and we very quickly talk ourselves out of obedience. But what Peter and John were just two knuckleheads. I mean, really, we made these apostles out they were something. They were knuckleheads. I mean, I'm not saying I'm better. I'm just saying we're all level. And I mean, it was pretty obvious. The guys, they said, I can tell they're not educated. I mean, obviously they weren't very sharp guys, but you know, they were not worried about that. But you know what else they said? They could tell they'd been with Jesus. Folks, you know what makes your life worth living? When you've been with Jesus. Because then, can others tell if I have not? That'll take care of itself. Well, I have boldness and witness. That'll take care of itself. Well, I have the faith. That'll take care of itself. Well, I have peace about it. That'll take care of it. Everything will take care of itself when you've been with Him. Well, I want to know Jesus. That'll take care of itself. But you got to trust in the Lord. How much? With all your heart. Lean not on what? My understanding. That is tough. Because, you know what we're interested in? We're very quick to say, no, wait a minute, I can't witness because I got this flaw, this flaw, this flaw, this flaw. But on the other side, when it talks about making decisions, well, I'm pretty sharp now. I mean, I can make pretty good decisions now. It's interesting how we flip that coin back and forth. But it says, lean not on your own understanding. And all your ways acknowledge Him. Now, if we'll do all that, how does it end? It gives you a promise, and He will then. Is there anything in this world more valuable to teach the children and grandchildren than how to have Almighty God directing their paths? Amen? And let me just share this one statement just because I'm crazy, I guess. To grandparents. Candace has a cousin, I'm trying to think what all Kelly's done, who's probably about, how old is Kelly? About 25, 27, something like that. And Kelly's been on the mission field, never been to college, never married, doesn't have kids, been on the mission field, still feels called by God maybe to be a missionary. She's from Graham, Texas. Now she's in Washington, D.C. on the mission field again, here in the United States. But there was a time in between when she was on the mission field that she came back to Graham. She lived with her grandmother, and she was, for free, volunteered to help a lady in her church who was a young mother who was dying of cancer. And they had 3 little kids. And so Kelly kind of made the nanny, just kind of watched the kids. The husband worked, the mother just was too sick. And she would kind of make sure the kids ate and played with them and all this kind of stuff. Did it for free. And there was people, relatives, probably and others, said, Kelly needs to get serious about her life. It's time, we're getting older. We get those little speeches. Now we're getting older now, come on, we got to bump it on out the door. Why would I foolishly think that she was not sitting in right center in the will of God? Why did I share that with you? It's because we love our children and we love our grandchildren. But we're still selfish, and we still have a definition of what we like to see them accomplish in life. And Kelly, hey, I'd be saying, that was my kid, hey, that didn't fit my definition. Maybe my definition is wrong. That is a possibility. When you're trying to teach your children and grandchildren to let God direct your path, well, first you better make sure that you're willing to let God change your plans and your definition for their life. Amen? It might not be God's will for her ever to go to college. It might not be, and that is possible. Because I know we push college and I push education. It is possible this might not be God's will. And therefore, if she goes to college and not God's will, she's in sin. And it might not be God's will for her ever have a job make what we consider very much at all. But what's important is having Almighty God direct her path. Amen? And what's bad is when parents and grandparents who've loved you all your life, and probably out of motivation of love and maybe a little bit of embarrassment, try to encourage you to do something that's outside the will of God for their life. Don't do that. Because there's enough people question them and other things. And you make sure God is directing your paths. Amen. And trust God with everything else. Trust God with your kids. That says, you know what, I trust God that He's big enough that He can handle it. And you know what, He might call me to get more involved, but when He does, I'll have to trust God to get more involved. But right now, I'm just giving it to Him and I'm waiting to hear from Him.